All right. Welcome back to PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and before I get started on this week's PacWest Bigfoot encounter story, just wanted to give a shout out to the old Blue Ridge Bigfoot out there. Mike has got some great, awesome encounter stories out there for those of you out that way around the Blue Ridge Mountains and enjoy some good Bigfoot campfire like tales based on true stories. So if you want to check that out over there, it's Blue Ridge Bigfoot. You can find him on YouTube. Real quick, we do have a winner. I'm not going to announce them yet till they get back to me, but on the 10th, I will announce the winner of this month's giveaway. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So I will do that next week on the 10th. Wanted to say thank you guys so very much for just paying it, just being here and paying attention to the old PacWest Bigfoot and me here and everything. Just really enjoy it all and enjoy you guys. And we'll be getting back to the live YouTube feeds this next week. I've just been doing a lot of interviews that'll be coming out pretty soon. I mean, an actual lot of live like interviews of individuals who have had encounters with Bigfoot. So with that, let's get a sip of the old Sasquatch coffee. Nice, clear the old throat. Let's settle in here. This is actually a really cool one. I like this. This is from up around my neck of the woods. As a matter of fact, I used to spend a lot of time up this way with my family. My mother actually one night, I have to say, up around Hyatt Lake, had heard some pretty intense screams one night that she could not attribute to a cougar or anything. So it was pretty interesting. So, are we ready? Then let's get going here. The Bigfoot of Fish Lake, Oregon. A scary night camping alone. This happened in 1992 when I was camping where I should not have been in the first place, but I did. And I had a pretty scary run in with Bigfoot, and a kind of mean one at that. I have to say, I get it when people say that these things are smart, but wild, scary, and impossible of anything. Personally, I am not sure my life was in danger, but I do know I was not in a safe situation either. Here's what happened and why I did not fish up there again until recently. The Fish Lake Bigfoot. I am pretty old now, so I do not mind telling my story that up till now I've only told my wife and our only daughter and my best friend. I was a resident, well, my family and I were residents of the Rogue Valley out towards Sam's Valley for a decade at that point. I'd married my wife around 1976 and we moved from the East Coast to Oregon. She was a nurse at a growing hospital in Medford and I was in sales. We both had an affinity for the Pacific Northwest and all things outdoors. We both loved to fish, hunt, and camp. We were not much for hiking, unless it led to good hunting and fishing, of course. But by the early 1980s, we had a daughter, our one and only child. Unfortunately, my wife had some complications during that birth, and her chances of more children were lost. But we had a little girl, healthy and full of energy. Today, her and her family still live out near Gold Hill area and have a thriving business in Medford. Being here for that long, and of course on television, we've heard of the mythical monster of the forest, Bigfoot. Neither of us believed in it, nor did we when we were out in the wilds of Virginia, where we were originally from. After my incident, I had heard some pretty spine tingling reports and stories from up around the entire area, especially Hyatt Lake, and the backside of Howard Prairie and Lake of the Woods, near some vacation homes up there. Not to mention Crater Lake, the most notorious. I have a friend sending you his story, Dave. You might want to work with that from Lake of the Woods, too. But as for my encounter story, it was scary, frightening actually, and there were telltale signs I should have been more aware of. But at least I am here today to tell you about them, and why you should leave an area if you experience any of these things the next time you are out and about in the woods of southern Oregon, camping and fishing. Like some of the reports I read today, I was up in the mountains alone, fishing and camping when my own personal Bigfoot encounter story happened. My wife was busy that week with training, and our daughter was with the grandparents for a few days, so why not head up to the woods and get some fishing in? So I did. I love Fish Lake, and back then there was a campground, of course, but I chose to camp elsewhere. Back in those days, there was less monitoring of camping about freely up and around a few of the smaller lakes, like 4 Mile and Fish Lake and Hyatt Lake, so I chose the southwest part of the lake to camp and fish. Here, the lake seemed to almost flow into a channel and then eventually spill into the North Fork of Little Butte Creek. I was staying basically right around the middle of that channel on the south side. Yes, back then, it was more like four-wheeling to get over there, but one could, if needs are, get there easy enough. And my needs were. I was never fearful or scared of the dark or being alone in the woods at all. Even today, I still go up alone, but I do not spend those nights. I do spend those nights closer to other people for safety's sake when camping. It was early September, so the lake, or late August or early September, so the lake was practically empty of folks, minus a couple camp hosts I believed to be around at the time, but I was not sure. This meant I could risk camping outside the campground area and enjoy some real peace and quiet, and some great fishing, of course. I'd be camping in the back of the truck as it was still summer. I remember the weather was in the low 80s and up there during the day and still in the low 50s at night, which made it perfect for camping. I would head up Thursday morning and come back Sunday, but instead I'd head back in the middle of the night or wee hours of the morning Saturday. I got up there, set up my camp, gathered some wood for that first day, and set myself to some fishing. It was quiet, peaceful as usual, and there really was almost no one or nobody around there. There were a couple of boats out that day, but just a couple. I was completely alone, it felt, but that would turn out to not be true. While the day was uneventful, the evening, the first one, would prove to be at least a little bit weird. There are a ton of black bear up this way, and I mean a lot. They are a nuisance, but they are great to watch, at least from a distance, especially with a mama bear and her cubs. Earlier that day I had seen two running about. Both seemed to be males, so that is what I believed I was hearing that night around the camp. Around and around it goes. The first night and second night I would hear some pretty strange things and something would circle my camp. I was settling down for the evening. I was tired and headed to the bed of the pickup truck to lay down under the stars and enjoy the owls and other cool noises the Pacific Northwest night brings. I never knew, however, that it would bring something strange and scary. But that first night, and I believe it was a Bigfoot, I would hear some sort of guttural sounds and movement around my camp. Whatever it was kept going around and around for a few minutes or so. It started just about after midnight. I woke up to a low fire, really just embers and a lick of flame here and there from the fire pit. But it was not the occasional pop from the fire that would wake me, it was a guttural sound. Not sure how to explain it, but it sounded like an animal grunting in a way, I suppose. My first thought was bear, of course, but there was some oddness to follow for sure that had me wondering a bit about it being a bear at all. Whatever it was at the time seemed to be circling my camp, and I sat up and grabbed my flashlight and started pointing the beam in the direction of the sounds I was hearing. Funny thing, though, the second I flashed that light, everything went quiet. No movement, no nothing from the woods. Usually, and I've been in the woods enough to notice this before, but a light in the middle of the night does not stop a bear from moving. Yes, they might move on or keep doing what they're doing, but they do not stop or go quiet. Not really ever. Wild animals, especially bear, are not thrown by flashlights. They do not freeze up or have the intelligence, I believe, to know they are in some danger or whatever. This did strike me as odd. So I asked out loud if anyone was there. Anybody here? Not too loud, but loud enough to be heard. Nothing. No reply Apparently, it was not a person, but the sounds of circling stopped and all went quiet. I turned off the light, and whatever it was started walking again. Only this time it was walking off in the direction it came. I was not listening carefully enough to tell if it was on two legs or four legs, like I said. I was thinking it was a bear at the time. That was the first night, and what I heard. That incident, I believe, was a Bigfoot around my camp. Fishing in the fog. The next morning, as I imagined and expected, the lake was misty, and the overcast morning added to the darkness of the Pacific Northwest woods. It was colder that morning than the one before, and I was second guessing sleeping in the truck instead of a tent. But by noon it was almost 75 degrees and sunny, and the thoughts of the colder morning faded away as I fished on. Fishing was good, I remember. By one or two, I already hit my daily limit. But before that, about the time I started fishing, actually, I had watched a couple boats hit the water and do some trolling around the lake. I also noticed someone across the lake at the same time. But this person was, and had, some very odd characteristics about them that led me to believe that this was the first visual I believe I would have of Bigfoot. It was about an hour into fishing off the bank. I had my waders on and was out almost to the top of my thigh deep in the water when I saw someone across the way on the opposite shore. Well, they were near the shore at least. The boaters were down toward the other side of the lake fishing. I could barely see them. But whoever this was, I don't know. I don't think they were fishing. They seemed to be just standing there. It was odd. I could not make out too much. They seemed tall, but then again, they stood on a slight incline. But nonetheless, they seemed tall among the short brush and trees. The light fog and overcast was not any help in figuring out if this was a man or a woman. It was more like a tall shadow, but a shadow that was plain enough to make out the shape of a person, a human shape standing in the woods. It still stood there, which started making me feel pretty weird, even a little creepy, because they just stood there, still as a statue, for the most part, just staring out in the direction of the lake and myself. I decided to get back into my fishing and take my eyes off them just in case they thought I was the creepy one staring at them instead. Of course, every so often I would look up and still they stood there. But after a couple minutes, just as I looked up again, I watched this tall person meander off up the hillside and into the woods. They seemed a little awkward as they walked off, however. They moved rather fast, though. After about a few seconds, they were gone, and I was back to fishing. Personally, that was the first visual I would have of Bigfoot, I believe, once I'd seen that awkward way in which it would walk again. I knew it was Bigfoot. I saw that morning, and Fish Lake is a place they live, threatened by Bigfoot. That night I left early seemed to start out as the best day, but the night became scary and for a moment seemed almost life-threatening in a way, I guess. I woke up, fished, took a walk for a bit, and everything was great. I even ran into a couple older gentlemen who was fishing about 100 yards down from where I was camping. Of course, I did not tell them I was camping in the area. I did mention the shadow in the woods across the way. I can't remember why the conversation came up, but it did. The younger of the two mentioned uh, that they caught it caught their attention. They talked to me about a Bigfoot. This part of the conversation did not last but a minute or two, but he had mentioned that one time when he was driving a delivery truck between Medford and Klamath Falls, he'd seen something like that, a tall, dark something or other, cross the road in front of him one early evening on two legs. He swore it was a Bigfoot, but the other gentleman he was with laughed it off, and I, inside, well, to be honest, I did too. I guess I should have taken him seriously, and I wish I would have got his name that day. I'd love to compare notes. But the day itself meandered on lazily as that person that walked up the hill. After the conversation, it was perfect, warm, sunny, and I was looking to get some fishing done that late afternoon. By 5 p.m., I think it was, I was getting back to camp, as the sun was starting to set earlier by then. I got a fire going, cooked up a trout, grabbed some fruit salad and a Coke, and settled down with a book on tape running in the car. I'm a huge fan of Clive Cussler and the whole Oregon Files series. Usually I read the book, but this was a special gift from my daughter. She got me for my birthday not long before the camping trip, so I figured I'd give it a try. I had been listening and actually enjoying it. As it grew darker outside and the stars started to shine and the moon started to rise, I stoked the fire when I first noticed a sort of whistle sound coming from the direction of the front of my truck. It came from beyond the truck, of course, not exactly in front of it, but in that direction. A whistle in the woods at night is something that really catches your attention, as that is just not normal unless there is a person about. And where I was located, well, that would be rather strange at that time of night. But it was a whistle I heard for sure. I half expected a person to come out from the tree line and say hello. It would still startle me, yeah, but it is what I was expecting. What I got was another whistle and dead silence to follow. I walked around to the front of the truck, turned the stereo down a bit, and continued to listen to, well, nothing, like I said. After the whistle, only crickets could be heard. But even their chorus would die out suddenly, soon enough. I stood there looking, waiting for a response, I recall, but nothing. Maybe someone was walking by, a hiker or whatever, and simply did not know I was there, or was letting me know by whistling they were passing by and not to shoot. It's not like it's unheard of. Rare, but accidents have happened. After a minute or two, I turned the stereo back up. Not as loud this time, but loud enough to hear over the crackling fire. Eventually, I got tired, figured it was time to turn in, so I turned off the car stereo and stoked up the fire. I threw a couple extra logs on, and that was humming in just a minute or so. I was very glad I did that too. I think it kept me safe. Or safer, at least, not 30 minutes later. I laid back down after I locked everything down and put the ice chest with the food in the cab of the truck. There was nothing left out really, just me in the bed of the truck and the fire and a few feet or so from me burning like a true bonfire practically. It was not long after laying down and starting to close my eyes when I heard something circling the camp again. It was heavy sounding, and this time I could sense it was two-legged. I guess there was a person around my camp after all. I sat up and tried to look past the fire that was still roaring, but that was impossible to see far enough past it to see who was walking around my camp in the middle of the night. The who, however, would turn into a what in minutes. I jumped out of the truck, threw another log onto the fire, and kept my eye on the dark tree line. The sound of walking kept going. When I asked aloud, "Who's there?" I heard no reply. That kind of made me uncomfortable. Who does not answer you in the middle of the forest in the middle of the night other than young folks trying to scare you or psycho killer Jason Voorhees type, I thought. I decided that my handgun would be a smart thing to holster as the walking around the camp continued. I did warn that I was armed and that I would shoot. But once again, nothing. No answer. The crickets at this point went silent, and suddenly so did the walking around the camp. After a few seconds of quiet, a small limb came flying out of the north side of my camp, just missing the fire pit and landing 3 to 4 feet past it on the ground. Someone was playing games, and now I was mad for the lack of a better term and colorful metaphor. It's a boogeyman. I turned in the direction from where the limb came, expecting to see someone again, but instead I got a rock thrown at me next, and a growl from Hades. It whizzed right by my head, I swear. A rock about the size of a decently sized pebble that would have hurt sped right past my face at eye level. I reacted quickly by ducking behind the truck, and I unbuttoned the strap on my gun. The walking started up again, and my head followed the sound of whatever or whoever that was walking even faster now. That is when I started to hear and feel a very scary and guttural growl. Like a lion in the night on some savanna somewhere, this growl was loud and deep. It felt like it went right through me, and I swear I felt the vibration of it through my hand that was on the side of the truck. I followed the sound of the footsteps as the thing kept growling. What is it? A mountain lion? A real big one hunting me? It stopped just on the other side of the campfire again. Only this time I could see that it was not a person or a mountain lion. It was a boogeyman. I could make out its face, its hair, and skin color. Well, almost in its gigantic teeth as it bared them at me. It was covered in hair, this Bigfoot. But for a moment I figured I was just looking at a boogeyman. The hair was long, like 3 inches at least, and the color of the night that surrounded it, jet black. Its skin tone, however, seemed almost grayish in tone, like a light smoky gray. It was wrinkled and the face looked like a gorilla except with a long, weird nose. The mouth was a slit almost, but as it bore its teeth, the mouth became huge. The teeth were blocked, and I noticed canines in the back. It was hunched over at the waist a bit, and the arms looked to go past its knees. Well, its fingers did at least. I noticed hands like mine. Well, ours, 5 digits in all. I also noticed this thing was on 2 legs and was at least 7 to 8 feet tall. Its eyes had a glint of red, and its expression at the moment seemed, well, scary to me. Wild looking in the eyes. I had no idea what I was staring at. The only reference was a Bigfoot, and that is what it was, I believe. I reached down and pulled out my handgun. I did not point it yet, but I held it as I moved to the front of the truck. This monster instantly moved to the right with me and moved like lightning, almost leaping in a way, I guess. It then and then it growled again, stomped with its foot on the ground twice, if I remember correctly. Seemed like it was like a bull about to charge or something. It growled again, and suddenly it screamed so loud I thought my head was going to explode. You could really feel it vibrate through you. I thought for a moment there I was in some serious mortal trouble. I did not want to shoot, but I would have. I do not remember now how I managed it, but I found myself in the cab of that truck and starting it. Next thing I knew, I took off, peeling out and looking back at a Bigfoot that was still running after me. It stopped when I hit the little road that ran around the lake, but I was surprised I did not hit a tree on the way out there. That thing was on my tail, and I was freaking out, yelling all the way, "Oh my gosh!" No more Fish Lake for me. 2 plus 2 is 4. And that was the same Bigfoot I'd seen the day before on the opposite shore. And it was circling my camp that night for sure. It took me years to go back up there and fish, and recently I did. Again, I headed back there with my daughter. I told her my story, and even fished in this spot as I did back then. She was surprised at first, but then again, she had her own story of a road crossing not years ago outside of Gold Hill, Oregon, she and her husband had had. Funny. Well, I guess Southern Oregon is crawling with them. Bigfoot. And I guess it's time you heard my story. Thanks. Klaus.